Happy birthday,
Oh, my.
dear Daddy. Happy birthday to you.
Reinforcement. Well, shall I?
I guess you have to.
Before we burn it out.
You help me, Teen.
You read it.
Ready, Teen? Here we go.
Read what it
Say
says.
it.
For reinforcement
No, what's that? That's right.
Blow out candles to get reinforced.
out candles.
Something's going to happen if I blow it out now.
right.
Reinforce.
Lisa
Would you
can
help me
read.
blow now?
It's hard for Lisa to blow because she has some teeth missing. The wind whistles
I
through.
thought they were those candles that don't go out. Are they? They really went out, didn't
How does it feel to be 70 then?
they? Well, a little different from 69, I suppose.
He's like any other grandfather. He loves his grandchildren. He loves children in general. It's relaxation, and he's granddaddy. You know, he's not anybody who needs to be awed and watched out for. He's just granddaddy.
Yeah, pero... Yeah. Pull! Oh! Yeah! Woo! Yeah! Woo-hoo! Ba 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 banana, ba 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 banana, oh ba 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 banana, ba 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 banana, ba ba banana, tocali lo potatori, cani malo manica notica, ba 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 banana, yo plano fu, la pano no tu, ma banana la camo pitamo banana, ba 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 banana, potato. Tocali no potatoli, cani malo manica notica, ba 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 banana.
Hello everyone, hope you're having an amazing Sunday. We're back for Skinner Sundays, Skinner Sundays, and it was his birthday yesterday, so happy birthday to BF Skinner, and thank you for the amazing science and technology that you have provided us with that we use to help so many animals and people. So how is everyone doing? I can see that Rowder's watching. Hi Rowder, how you doing? Hi Magali. Hi Jenna. Nathan's got to finish his assignment, so he can't stay with us tonight. I'm sorry to hear that, Nathan. Hopefully he can catch up on the recording. That was quite funny. I got it off YouTube. Hi Rowder. Hi Jenna. Hi Bridget. Just getting started. Hi Claire. Hi Jessica. Hi Jane. Hi Sue. Sue's amazing. She's a fantastic groomer. Hi Pascal. Hi Cheryl. Hi Fiona. Hi Chirag, ready to celebrate with cider and cake. Amazing. I have my gin and tonic with me in my party glass. So I'm glad you've got your cake. What kind of cake do you have? Katie says bonkers. Good evening from Discover Northumberland. Hi Neil, how are you? Hi Karen. Hi Sylvia from Germany. Oh, that's a beautiful picture. Hi Megan. Megan says currently doing a dog behavior assignment, but don't want to miss this. Oh. Hi Christina. Hi Debbie. Hi Anne. Hi Rachel. Hi Nikki. Hello Sally. Hi Katie. Hi Jamie, how are you? Hi Francesca. Hello, Anne. We have an international audience tonight. And Fiona says it's chocolate cake from yesterday. The dogs have their own too. That's amazing. I love it. Maybe you can post a picture for us in the comments below, and we'll get to have a look at it after this live feed. Ruthie says, where's my bake? Would love to see your baking skills. I do love baking, actually, and I do have some baking skills. Let me see if I can show you a picture of some of my baking, but I haven't had a chance to bake this week, unfortunately, because I've been busy with a lot of building work. I haven't been doing the building work. I've just been standing there watching, but that's been hard enough. Let me see if I can find you a picture of my baking before we get started today. Oh, maybe. Oh, there we go. Oh, what other pictures do we have on here? Oh, saucy. Let's go with this one. Don't know if you can see it. It's not the best for lighting, but I'll post it in the comments. It's my version of a rainbow cake. Yeah, no, you can't see it very well, but I'll post it in the comments so you can check it out later on. Nice to see so many familiar faces here. Hi, Tracy Rose. Okay, guys, so I thought today's session we could watch actually I think it is the last official speech that Skinner did, and it was only 8 days before his death, and it was at the American Psychological Association, where he was given an award and he did a little talk. It's about a 20-minute talk altogether, and I thought today, rather than hi Anna, rather than doing a lot of starting and stopping, we could just listen to it. And if you guys have any comments or questions about anything, feel free to post, and we'll stop when I see comments or have something to say, and then we'll carry on as normal. If you guys haven't had a chance to check out any of the other recordings yet from the previous Skinner Sunday videos, then please feel free to head to YouTube or look on my Facebook page, and you can watch the previous videos. So good luck, Alexis. Post us a picture of your new foster pup. Would love to see him. Okay, so let's find our video for today.
10th, 1990, in Boston, Massachusetts, B.F. Skinner received the American Psychological Association's Special Presidential Citation for lifetime contributions to psychology. On this occasion, he delivered the keynote address for the 98th Annual Convention of the APA.
This association has always been very good to me. I went to my first meeting in 1932. Most of you were not yet born, I suppose. My paper was on schedules of reinforcement, believe it or not, and it was at the very end of the program, and almost everyone had gone home, but one person who stayed was Richard M. Elliott, who 4 years later gave me my first job at the University of Minnesota. Later, the association provided space for a conference on the experimental analysis of behavior that some of my friends and I had organized, and that became, of course, Division 25. Somewhere along the line, I also received your Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award, and now this, probably the greatest honor in my life. I am extremely grateful. It has been...
Isn't that amazing that he was able to get this award, the honor of his life, just 8 days before he died? I think that's amazing.
Suggested that I might make a few remarks in return. Psychologists, following the philosophers, have looked inside themselves for explanations of their behavior. They have felt their feelings and observed their states of mind and mental processes through introspection. Introspection has never been a very satisfactory process. Philosophers have acknowledged its defects, but argued that nevertheless it is the only way to self-knowledge. The psychologists tried to improve it. Wundt and Titchener particularly invented brass instruments, as William James called them, to present stimuli, the effects of which were to be introspected, and they trained observers. A trained observer, for example, could see red without seeing it as a red object. That was a stimulus error. Watson, of course, attacked introspection in his manifesto of 1913, and I suppose you could say he was successful because, at any rate, psychologists have stopped introspecting almost entirely. Cognitive psychologists probably see the representations of reality they talk about. In fact, they say that's all you possibly can see. But I don't think they claim to see themselves processing them, storing them in memory, retrieving them, and so on. Instead, they have resorted to theories about what is going on in the head or the mind. But theories have to be confirmed, and the question is, how can you be sure a theory is right until you can see what it's a theory about? Well, as you know, most of them have turned for that to brain science. The mind is what the brain does, and the brain can be inspected rather than introspected like any other organ. But does the brain really initiate behavior as the mind or self was said to do? The brain is part of an organism, and what it does is simply part of what the organism does. It is part of what is to be explained. Now that explanation, I think, can only be found by looking outside the organism, the individual, rather than within. And it is found in three kinds of variation and selection. The first of these was natural selection, which explains why we have a body and a brain at all. But there was a difficulty with that. It prepares a species only for a future that resembles the selecting past. That fault was corrected by a...
Oh, my screen's just frozen.
But there was a difficulty with that. It prepares a species only for... But there was a difficulty... It prepares...
While we experience technical errors, please just stand up and do a little dance. The live feed shall return to you within a few moments.
The brain is part...
We do thank you for your patience.
In 1990 in Boston, Massachusetts, B.F. Skinner.
So, just experienced some technical issues, guys. And so, just bear with me for a second. Someone asked, who was it? Let's see. Cheryl asked, how old was he when he passed? I believe the answer is 86. I'm just going to remove the video and reload it and see what it does for us. It didn't like it when I typed a thing in a chat box, so maybe I shouldn't type anything into a chat box.
1990 in Boston, Massachusetts.
Okay. I know. It's taken a moment. Maybe my internet, my battery's going to die soon as well. And I've been not very organized today, so it's not even plugged in. Haven't set the environment up for success. If you give me a moment, I shall do that. And then we can revene. Okay. There we go. I have plugged myself back in. Well, not myself personally. I've plugged my laptop back in. And then Nikki says, switch it off and then switch it back on again. That's a very good idea. I pretty much did that. So I think I can see the videos reloaded. So we can have a look and carry on. Okay. Just catching up on your comments. Okay, perfect. So let's go and see if we can find the right spot.
Self was said to do. The brain is part of an organism, and what it does is...
So the video seems to be frozen, but you can hear the audio, so we can just listen to the audio until the video catches up. So there Skinner saying, looking at part of the brain and looking at as part of what the animal's doing and finding explanations. So looking into the environment to look for explanation as to why it's doing what it's doing.
Simply part of what the organism does. It is part of what is to be explained. Now that explanation, I think, can only be found by looking outside the organism, the individual, rather than within. And it is found in three kinds of variation and selection. The first of these was natural selection, which explains why we have a body and a brain at all.
So we've talked about this in the previous live feeds, the different kinds of selection, and Skinner talked about natural selection, and then selection through consequences, operant conditioning, and cultural selection. And so we talked about it in last week's episode, and you get to hear him talk about this in a little bit here in this video too.
But there was a difficulty with that. It prepares a species only for a future that resembles the selecting past. That fault was corrected by a further evolutionary step, the evolution of operant conditioning, which enabled the environment of the individual to select behavior with contingencies that were not stable enough to work through natural selection.
So essentially, we're talking about operant conditioning being a selection process that's there to correct for natural selection, where natural selection sets the learner up for behaviors over generations. And here, this is more about the specific individual and their environment, because how can you account for every single environment for every single individual? And so there's another kind of selection that accounts for that.
However, one can learn very little in a solitary world by operant conditioning, but unless you have the social environment, which is a rich set of contingencies of reinforcement and responsible for the elaborate repertoires we all acquire. Cultures also evolve, and that is the third type of variation and selection. Now, if these three external kinds of circumstances explain what the body does, then what is this mind or self supposed to be doing? Does it exist? There seems to be no room for it in a scientific account. You can say it is explained by contingencies of selection and in turn explains behavior, but that isn't necessary. You can skip the thing entirely. Well, let's start again, and we'll start a long way off. Everyone talks about behavior and did so long before there were philosophers or scientists of any kind. We all speak it. It's a vernacular. It's a proper word to call it. Vernacular is not pejorative. It means, as the root meant for the Romans, the language of the household, of daily life. We all speak it. It is a language in which newspapers, magazines, and books are published. It's the language of radio, television. When they are talking about the individual, it is a language used by psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, political scientists, and economists, all the behavioral sciences. It is the language used by professionals when they deal with their clients for the very simple reason it is the only language the clients understand. Now, there's a very curious thing about that language. The vernacular refers very richly to feelings and states of mind, so that there is some reason to suspect that we are back with what psychologists have been looking for. However, if you examine the terms in the vernacular, you find that each one has a double meaning. I say, I'm hungry, and I think I'll get something to eat. Now, what am I saying? Am I mentioning a feeling, hunger, and am I talking about some cognitive process called thinking? Or am I conveying to someone something about my personal history? To say I am hungry is to say, among other things, I haven't eaten for some time. To say I am hungry, among other things, says, if you give me some food, I'll probably eat it. The terms in the vernacular which seem to refer to feelings and states of mind are really talking about contingencies of reinforcement, about the world and about its effect on people. 3 years ago, I published a paper in the...
So I think that's fascinating. And when you listen to that in more detail, and you might have to listen to it 2 or 3 times, and you go, one sec, shaping of that verbal repertoire of I am hungry, what are we actually saying? Where does it come from? What's the reinforcement history behind it? And it's really interesting to hear how Skinner phrases those words and talks about, is it a description of, he doesn't say it in these words, but his words were much better. Is a description of prior learning and a history of reinforcement and the contingencies when you say that, and what has that phrase meant, and what happens when you use that phrase. You access, or food is maybe provided to you, and so there's a reinforcement history that shapes certain verbal repertoires. Also, there's going to be certain sensations that we go, I call this the feeling of hunger, and that starts becoming part of that reinforced package. I think that's the way I look at it. But when you listen to it, I think it's really interesting to kind of think, all breaking that down into the reinforcement history of verbal behavior. And Skinner has a book called Verbal Behavior, which is a fascinating read, and maybe we can go through it on one of our Skinner Sunday sessions.
American psychologist. I've had too great a share of that journal, I'm afraid. But it was called The Origins of Cognitive Thought. In it, I considered perhaps 70 or 80 words, each of which referred, on the one hand, to a mental process of some kind, but on the other, to a purely physical kind of thing, either to the kind of situation in which a person finds himself or herself, or the contingencies which are operating to select behavior appropriate to that situation. There are, in my own experience, some 1,500 words that have that double meaning. Now, what has happened, I think, is that psychology has split in two ways. One part going in the direction of finding out the essence of the feeling, the essence of the cognitive process, and the other going in the direction of references to contingencies of reinforcement. The psychologist who is a professional, who is a practitioner, uses the vernacular of his or her clients to find out more about what has happened to them and what they are probably going to do. The psychologist who claims to be a scientist investigating certain.
So that's fascinating. So that's what we do with our clients as well. When it comes to use of language, we might use and refer to certain words that they're saying. And for trainers, I think because there's bad words and good words, and from a training perspective, when you learn of how necessarily maybe it isn't about dominance or it isn't about being pack leader, and these words also from a popular perspective have various meanings to different people based on the discussions that go on culturally and how culturally these things are looked at. And so as a trainer, you sometimes go, oh, I don't use the D word, or I don't talk about pack leader. However, sometimes when you have a client, it's actually really useful to be able to use the language that they're using, because that's the language they relate to. They have a reinforcement history. And there's a reinforcement history also. You have a sense of confidence that comes from reinforcement history. So I think when you start just completely using new words, there's a lot of, oh, I don't know what that means, or oh, I'm not sure about that. And you might get some people just nodding their heads and kind of agreeing with you, but they don't actually maybe agree with you. And so as what I teach trainers is, don't be scared to use the language that your people are using. So if I go to a client and they say, yes, I want him to be more, I need him to, I don't know, be more obedient, and I need to be, I want to learn how to be a good pack leader, then I might say, well, to be a good leader, you can definitely do a number of things. So you can be very clear with what you're asking your dog to do. And you can be clear by giving clear cues, clear consequences, and those consequences can, like, reinforcing behavior positively when we see it happen, and when your dog's doing something you don't want, to provide clear information again. So you might set up the environment so it helps your dog do what you want them to do instead, and then be able to reinforce that behavior. So, and I wouldn't necessarily use the word reinforced, I would probably use the words that they're using, so reward or paid. And so think about the language your client's using and how can you use that language. I remember when we're teaching a class one year, a few years back, and we had an elderly couple come to class, and they had a border collie, and they'd rescued this border collie just a week before. They'd had dogs all their life, and they'd never had any issues. This particular collie, the 7-month collie they got, they said she was just too much. And so when they came to class, another one of my colleagues at the time was teaching the class, and I was kind of hanging around watching, and they turned up, I think, slightly late, so I helped them settle in. And then as the trainer was teaching, I kind of just said, well, if you want to just sort of do this exercise, this is what they're working on. And they said, oh, no, we don't want to use any food. And I was like, okay, that's fine. So what is it that you would like to use? You can use anything that makes it worthwhile for your animal, your dog, to do what you want the dog to do. And they said, well, she just needs to learn to listen. And I said, okay, what would you like her to listen to? And she's like, well, I want her to know what no means. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And so can you give me an example? When would you like her to know what no means? What would you like her, what does no actually mean? And so rather than kind of saying to a client, well, no, we don't teach no. Oh, no, we don't do this. Oh, no, we don't do that. Suddenly, they're giving you a lot of information here. So actually listening to the language they're using and what it means can be really useful. So as this client gave me more information, they said, well, she needs to learn no. And an example of that would be she jumps up and she's not very good with food. So if there's food around, she'll jump and she'll snatch it. When we're having our dinner, she'll be jumping on the table, and it's a real hassle. And so she needs to learn manners, and she needs to learn to listen when she's told. And I said, okay, so, well, how about we start telling her a few things and teaching her how to listen to them? And so straight away, when I said that, so you might be going, what? You're telling the dog? And normally we talk about asking the dog and motivating the dog, but that's what I mean, but I'm just going to use different terminology to get the client on board. And also, if I'm using language that relates to the client, they're listening. So the client was like, okay, yeah, I'm listening. So I was like, okay, so you said that you want her to have more manners around food. And when she's told no, she should learn to listen, and you want to be in charge. And they're like, yes, we want to do that. So I was like, okay, perfect. So I can teach you how to do that. So in order for her to learn no around food, do you mind if we use a bit of food? And that's fine. And so I got a bit of food. I don't remember what it was, cheese, hot dog or something. And so I said, okay, this is food. Now this is going to be your food. So you're going to take this food, and anytime you're eating the food, you're going to pretend to eat the food. You can eat if you want. You don't have to. They looked at me a bit odd, but I was like, you can pretend to eat the food. When you're pretending to eat the food, anytime that she is keeping her body on the floor, we're going to tell her she's good. And if we don't tell her she's good, how is she going to know that that's what we want? And so they started to do that, and I held the lead, so it set them up for success. So they didn't have this dog jumping all over them. And as they pretend to eat this food, the dog's body's on the floor, and I said, okay, you can tell her she's being good now. So they told her she's being good, and I said, so in order for her to know, like, you're the boss now, if you want to give her the treat, you can tell her she can take the treat. Is that okay? And I said, if you tell her she can take it, then you can give her the treat. So essentially, we're teaching a leave and a take it, and maybe differently to how I teach it now, but in that situation, it's quite effective. And so before we knew it, they were doing essentially food behaviors. I've got food, I'm pretending to eat it. That becomes a cue for the dog. That 4 feet on the floor pays off. But for the client, if I was to start changing all the language, then I might not have kept them on board. And so they're still teaching the same thing. And it was really interesting because over the number of weeks, they would do various different things that maybe we wouldn't do in class, the way we wouldn't teach them. But by week 6, they actually turned up, or the one of the caregivers turned up, and he actually bought treats with him. But he actually bought a whole joint of ham as opposed to little things cut up. But that was still a great approximation because he bought some food to use as reinforces the rewards. So just something to think about when you're talking to your client. If they say I need to tell my dog to do this, or tell them, you can start to just get them on board. If it's the first session and you start using the same language and then showing them what you want in a positive way, you get the client on board. Whereas if you start putting up barriers, then often the client's going to go, oh, this person's not listening to me. That's not what I'm saying. Another example would be a client who says, like when a client says, I don't want to use food, how many times do you find yourself saying, and again, I'm talking from my own experience, before I used to be like, oh, do you know you could use the dog food as part of the rewards? You don't have to use extra treats. Or, oh, can I ask why you don't want to use food? And sometimes for a lot of clients, that can become quite aversive. They've specified they don't want to use food, and then we keep mentioning food. So if you've got a client who comes to you, like a client says to me, I don't want to use food, in the first thing I might say is, okay, that's fine. The only thing we need to be able to do is find something that we can pay your dog's behavior with, because the basic principle is, if we find the right paycheck, that behavior is going to happen more often. The dog will do it more often. If we don't have anything to pay that the dog wants, they're not going to do the behavior. And that's just like us. We go to work, we get paid. If we stop getting paid, or we don't get paid enough, we stop going to work. And that's just the basic law of life. So I say it in that way, and it causes a little smile and gets them to go, oh yes. And then I was like, so it's up to you. You don't, as you said, you don't want to use food. That's completely fine. But we need to find something that we can use that will work for your dog's behavior. And if you, there are a few options: toys. We can use praise. We can use play, and we can test it out. So you can try one thing, see how it works for your dog. If it doesn't work, try something else. So in the class, we support them and allow them to discover, oh, okay, I'm just going to say good boy and touch them when the dog does something, and then you find the dog's doing less of it because the dog finds the touch aversive, so they're moving away. But rather than saying to a client that's not going to work, let them discover this, let them interact with the contingencies and see what this actually means or looks like. So for example, the client starts to say good dog and touch, as long as it's safe and not dangerous. The client says good dog, the dog kind of backs away, or they say sit and the dog backs away. You can start going, okay, let's stop for a second. So what do we see? When you say sit, the dog sits. And then you said good boy, and you tapped him on the head. When you tapped him on the head, I don't know if you noticed, what I saw was he just backed away a little bit. And so it seems that then he's not sitting as often. So maybe he loves you, and he maybe loves your affection at home, or when you're on the sofa, when you're watching Netflix with your partner, you might want attention. But maybe when you're doing something else, you're playing the PlayStation, you don't want someone tapping you. And that's the same for the dog. So maybe in this situation, the praise isn't working. So how about we try food, or we try toys, or we try something else. And so that way we let the person discover what kind of things work. And in the class, they don't have to be working on the same exercise that everyone else is working on. They can just have a few moments to try and find a reward that they can use with their dog. So just some ideas in terms of how I would deal with it. I'm not saying that's how you have to deal with it or work through this, but it's just some thoughts I'm sharing with you. So Jessica says, it's so hard to minimize your own reaction to certain things that are so triggering or aversive, such as a concept of dominance, when you have experience with the damage that does to dogs. Yet this is such a great point. Shape the humans too, including yourself. And so definitely, Jessica, it's such a good point. Like you say, your behavior is a result of the reinforcement history and reinforcement and punishment history as just as much as your human students and your dog's behavior is. And so when you do, like if someone says, oh yes, I use a choke chain, and you go, oh, and you cringe, we have to teach ourselves to engage in a different response under those conditions, so that we can express our external or internal behaviors differently. Because if we do that with our clients, they go, oh, I can't say that again, because when I said I smack my dog when he jumps up, the trainer told me off, or the trainer told me I shouldn't do that. And then almost what the client hears is it's punishing for them, and so then they don't share with you other information that could be really useful. And so I think there is a lot of work we have to do. And I often think about, what's the point is when I'm going to say something, is it to prove a point? Sometimes it's just like, I said it because I feel better now and I proved a point. Or is it actually, what's my goal? My goal is to be able to help this client and help the dog long term. And so my goal is for them to want to come back next week and want to laugh and giggle and engage in listening behaviors. And if I ask them to do something, they want to try it. And so if I start thinking, what's my goal long term, then suddenly it changes the next bit of verbal repertoire that comes out out my mouth, because I'm trying to achieve something very specific. So when you do feel sort of frustrated, or you're hitting certain extinction in terms of something's not working that's previously worked for you with a client, rather than go for an extinction burst yourself in your verbal repertoire, maybe just stop for a second and go, what's my goal here? What's my long-term goal that I want to achieve? Now, how can I say it in a way? Maybe I don't address it in this moment because it's not necessarily the worst thing that's happening. And actually, if I watch the dog, maybe some tugs on the dog's neck or the collar aren't the best thing for the dog, but yet they're not the worst thing in the moment. And also, if I watch the dog's behavior, the dog's actually bouncing back and running, and the dog's not finding it punishing. It could be a little bit aversive, but the dog's still engaging in the behavior. And that just made me think about something that I remember Dr. Susan Friedman saying. We were teaching a workshop in Nice, and we turned up at the venue, and there was some geese in this pen, and I turned up and I looked and I was like, oh, poor geese, it's such a small enclosure. And she turned around and looked at me and gave me what I call a Susan bitch slap, which is she looked at me and was like, don't cry for these geese. Save your tears for the geese who show you through their behavior that they deserve your tears. And I was like, oh, okay. What does that mean? And then I thought about it, and it's true, because am I shedding my tears for these poor geese? Is it really poor geese? Maybe I look and go, oh, it's such a small enclosure. Oh, it's all of this. But actually, if I watch the geese's behavior and I look at the geese, they look relatively healthy. There doesn't seem to be anything of concern. So rather than crying without reason, let's gather the data first and then cry if we need to. Save our tears for the animals that actually need it. And there's a really good point. So I think like you say, it's so hard sometimes to be objective, and also there's so many things culturally, what we've seen with our dogs and other experiences and things that have impacted us, that we find it hard. But I think sometimes taking a step back and going, what's my goal here? What do I want to look at? And actually what's happening to a learner in front of me? And sometimes that can really be an eye-opener. Dog training is people training. It most definitely is. If someone said to me, oh yes, dog training is more about training people than dogs, I wouldn't have believed them to start with. But exactly, if we can't motivate the client and the caregiver, we're not going to be able to help the dog often, because most of the dogs we work with come attached to people. So coaching training is empowering owners and their animals to be successful. Exactly, Neil. Yep, trying to change the client's language just leads to frustration. So exactly, Jane. I think remember, when we're talking about trying to change client's language, we're talking about changing verbal repertoires, and so verbal behavior. And so how do we know we can change behavior through successive approximations? We talked about this last week in terms of teaching machines, small steps that are always successful. So we wouldn't, with a dog, put a chair in front of them and expect a chin rest, and the dog stands and stands there looking away from the chair. We wouldn't expect the next approximation to be chin on chair necessarily. And so there would be a number of steps to get to that point. So with the client as well, when they come in and they're talking about hitting their dog, or they're talking about this, that, and the other, why do we expect to go from here to from here to all the way to here? Why don't we look at what are the successive approximations to get there longer term? I struggle seeing aversive trainers, and seeing them all over social media gets getting so many followers. And it's a good point. And I think that's where I try and arrange my environment personally, not to be in a kind of reactive strategy. So almost looking at, okay, what can I do that's what am I doing that's setting up the environment to promote information that can be helpful, and put more of the information that I want to see out there about positive reinforcement and empowering learners, as opposed to going, oh, that person's annoying, or that person's, I tend not to worry about those people so much, and go, actually, let's do things where we can engage people, and also try and think outside the box a little bit in terms of how can I try and engage people who aren't already engaging? So how can I arrange the environment to try and bring an audience who might talk a different language, do different things? And I love that in terms of, I remember Dr. Ian Dunbar saying many years ago to me about how it's not about trying to get the people who are already singing from the hymn sheet. How can you work to actually bring other people on board? How can we arrange the environment? So I think as positive reinforcement trainers, sometimes we use language and we get so passionate, it can be quite aversive to bring in other people into a community. So I think trying to open those barriers a little bit, and like if someone asked me to teach a workshop and they used very different methods, so they use electric collars or prong collars or choke chains, or they smack their dog, I would happily turn up and teach a workshop for them, and that might be upsetting to some people, but I would love to, and I wouldn't necessarily use the methods they're using. However, I would happily be there, and because most of the people that I've met, and I used to be one of the people who used to have a choke chain on my dog, and I used to knee them for jumping up or step on their back feet as they jump up, and so I would happily be looking at going, oh, let's work together. I'll listen to what you're doing, and I'll offer some of my stuff and see where we can go from that, and plant little seeds. I think that's the best way to do it. Facebook is very glitchy, or maybe it's my internet today. Hi, Mother. Okay. It's not always easy to push our own desires for the immediate reinforcement aside, and the end goal is what's best for the dog. We all agree on that. Still difficult to override ourselves. Definitely, I think it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. Coming up with little strategies to help. So what are you like coming up with a plan? So under these conditions, what behavior am I going to engage in? And I remember in the car, I used to practice going, actually saying out loud, oh, my puppy bites. Okay, what do you do when your puppy bites? Oh, I give him a smack. And so I used to say that out loud, and so give him a smack is the cue for me to respond in a certain way. And I used to teach myself and practice in the car going, oh, okay, so that's really interesting. When you do that, is it working for you? Or what does your dog do? And finding a response that I can ask them, not to prove the person wrong or go, oh, how stupid are you? See, that doesn't work. But just to genuinely go, hold on a second, I want to understand. So how long have you been doing this for? Or is this working for you? Or would you like us to look at other ways we can see if we can work, try and find something that can help you? So finding non-judgmental ways of saying things, rather than trying to fight back and go, I'm going to prove you wrong. You said that, I'm going to make you see how stupid that is. Finding phrases. So I used to practice those in the car on my way to puppy class. And then what happens is when you actually hear it, because you've got that practice, you can actually put it into use in real life. So definitely isn't easy, but I think the more we practice in front of the mirror, or just while you're sitting there mulling over different scenarios, can actually be really useful. I found it useful. And again, these are just my opinions. So I'm not saying this is fact or this is what everyone should do. If the owner is under a time constraint, I need this to be fixed now, and is tempted to go to an aversive trainer because that will be faster, what might we use language to persuade them to give, I think that's meant to say a plus a try. And so that's a really good question, Nicole. So from my perspective, the first thing is we're not like just taking a step back and going, I never have to be in a situation that is a threat. So I don't have to be, oh my God, I'm in a threat, I need to panic. Poor dog. We're not going to be able to help every single dog and every single person. I think, so yes, that's the first thing I think about is actually I don't need to be under a certain constraint to go, oh my God, I need to help every single person. And that that changes the way I then feel and the way I respond. And it just is, I feel it's a bit more calming for me. And then the second thing is I will try and listen to what the client has to say. So what is it that's a real problem for them? So I can really understand you're saying you'd like this to be fixed now. So I would really like to try and help you find ways of fixing this. So I would again use the same language that they're using and go, okay, let's find a way to try and fix this right now. Okay, so what is it that we want our dog to do? Well, your dog growls at children, and you want your dog to stop growling at children. So we have a couple of little we have a couple of things we can start to do immediately today that's going to help you over the next couple of days when you go for walks, that your dog's going to be growling at children less. And so starting to focus on those things, and we might call that management, or we might use different labels for the things we're going to provide. But we should be able to have certain things in our toolboxes that are going to be allowing us to change behavior quickly. And so I might work with them to do that. Now, I might even go with, I don't generally use a lot of head collars, and I'm not saying I never would. But if in a situation where I needed to, I might bring out a head collar, or I might use that for temporarily, and then over the next week or so, fade that away and start to use other pieces of equipment, or not needing any equipment. I can just look at other ways of arranging the environment and practicing positive reinforcement training to change behavior. But I might even do that. So it really depends on what the example is. But I think actually with the client, rather than going, well, this is going to take 3 months, all the stuff I'm going to focus on next is actually the quick fixes. And we have quick fixes because, like I say, we call them management, the things that people are going to be able to use. Let's focus on that rather than going, well, it's going to take 8 months and this. And it's not a lie. It's true, because you are going to be able to send the client out and practice getting them to stand behind the car or feed the dog as another dog's going by or as a child's going by. And that's going to help in that situation almost immediately. And so these things are kind of quick fixes that we can use in the moment. So I think I feel comfortable saying that with a client. So hopefully that's given you a few tips. You're welcome, Cheryl. And Jamie. Jessica says, we have to come from a place of finding commonalities, meeting people where they are, as was previously said, and building towards the goals. Exactly. I think we when we go to work with clients, it's about working together as opposed to I'm the expert. You're stupid because you don't know what you're doing, or why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. But if you look back, we weren't born doing things that are scientifically correct or ethically correct and behaviorally correct. I did things that I thought made sense. Dominance made sense to me when I started training. So I wasn't trying to hurt my dog, but until I knew different. And so if someone was to come to me, a trainer was to come to me and go, well, that's just, you shouldn't do that. You're hurting your dog. It makes me feel bad, but is that really going to change my behavior long term? And so I think we need to sometimes take a step back and put ourselves into the client's shoes and remember that potentially we were doing some of the same things that they're doing now when we first started training. And until we learned different, many of us, I'm sure, would have been using doing certain things. And if you weren't doing them, great. But I know for me, I definitely was. Like I smacked my dog. I told him off. I used to practice walking through doorways, pretending to eat kibble out of his bowl before I put the bowl down. And so when I have clients who do these things, spray the dog in the face with water gun or stick a spray collar on them, I understand they're desperate. They really want to try and help or change something because there's a situation that either is unsafe or they can't live with, or but they genuinely tend to usually love their dog. So I think, yeah, let's see how we can work together. So I really love that, Jessica. Nicole, we've got you. I knew what you were saying. Christina says, if you have at least as much care and compassion for the person as you do for the dog, and choose to believe that they are doing the best they can with the knowledge they have, it means that you can more easily understand and meet the person where they are. People need to know how much we care before they care how much we know. There's always those people that we will find more difficult than others. Exactly. And I think that what I love, Christina, about your comment there as well is about what we find more difficult. And it's not necessarily the person, it could be their behavior. So we might find certain behaviors difficult. It's not that the person is difficult. And I always try and make that distinction. So we're not dealing with difficult clients. We're working on, we're finding certain behaviors, certain things that the client does difficult. And so that's not a label or judgment on the client. That's information about your learning history or my own learning history as a trainer, as a teacher. And that doesn't mean I have to find every behavior easy, or I have to change that. I could go, actually, I don't have the environment at the moment, or the rest of my environment isn't set up to help this client, so I can refer this client to someone else. Don't have to label them as a uncaring or stupid or whatever other label you want to use with that client. I can simply say, I am not in a situation where I can help this client, but there are many other trainers who can. And if someone else finds a certain client behavior difficult, another trainer might find it really easy. And again, that's not a judgment on the specific trainer, because all of our environments are different. So what one trainer finds difficult, another trainer finds easy, and vice versa. So I think we have to remember that it's not about us failing or not doing so well. It's about each of us have different conditions and different environments, so our behavior is going to differ. Nikki, I like the little picture you've got there in your profile. You're right, language is important. As a trainee trainer, I found most donors would prefer aversive methods or give the qualified trainer that I shadow a hard time older males. I will be more positive and use better language to help them see there's a better way. I love that. So give it a go, see what happens. If it doesn't work for you, that's fine, but maybe you might find just it helps and it changes the way people relate to you and how many dogs we're able to help. Exactly, Cheryl. I love that. And again, I think we're all essentially on this planet together, and we're not really that different. There's a lot of labels and constructs and cultural things that we tend to separate ourselves out and put us in boxes and separate one person from another. But actually, we're all pretty much the same. And so I think the more we start to treat people like that, the world will be a better place. Okay, let's go back to our friend Skinner.
Searching for an inner originating, creative, or initiating self is quite different and is doing quite different things. What has happened, I think, is that psychology has advanced as a practice, as a profession, far more rapidly than as a science. It began as a science. That is, it began as an effort to discover what was going on inside the mind or the self. But as the membership of this organization shows, it was the people who were interested in that particular topic soon became the minority. They were not only replaced by the professionals, but by psychologists who didn't care too much about what was going on inside, but were interested in behavior, not necessarily as behaviorists, in teaching, psychology, clinical psychology, developmental psychology, and so on. And those became important sciences quite apart from an effort to isolate an originating mind or self. The whole notion of selection by consequences seems extremely difficult to understand. We've seen what has happened in evolution. It is still true that biology cannot be properly taught in America because those who call themselves creationists or creation scientists oppose it as some kind of threat. If I say that psychologists, in searching for this inner self or mind, have wasted their time, you may feel that I am being arrogant. If I say that the philosophers who, over the centuries, have tried to discover themselves in that sense, that I am being arrogant. But I would call your attention to the fact that equally or even more brilliant men and women over a much longer period of time have been trying to establish the existence of and the nature of a different creator, in this case spelled with a capital C. Now, that is a very great problem. And you know how difficult it has been for natural selection to be accepted. Imagine how difficult it is going to be for the individual selection by consequences of operant behavior, or the other evolution of cultures and the other kinds of selection which take over the role of a creative self or mind. So far as I'm concerned, cognitive science is the creationism of psychology. It is an effort to reinstate that inner, initiating, originating, creative self or mind, which in a scientific analysis simply does not exist. I think this association has been through a recent trial just because of this difference. It has, as you know, suffered a kind of secession by cognitive psychologists who are unhappy when they associate with so many practitioners. And I would regard it not as a secession, but as an improvement. I think it is time for psychology as a profession and as a science in such fields as psychotherapy, education, developmental psychology, and all the rest. It is time to realize that the science which will be most helpful is not cognitive science searching for the inner mind or self, but selection by consequences represented by behavior analysis. Looking back on my life, 62 years as a psychologist, I would say that what I have tried to do, what I've been doing, is to make that point clear, to show how selection by consequences in the individual can be demonstrated in the laboratory with animals and with human subjects, and to show the implications of that for the world at large, in not only the profession of psychology, but in consideration of what is going to happen to the world unless some very vital changes are made. Any evidence that I've been successful in that is what I should like to be remembered by. Now, once again, thank you for this award and for your attention.
So that was the talk. Let's just change my screen. That was our talk today, and I think we went on a little slide tangent talking about verbal behavior, a little bit of verbal behavior, and with clients, and the kind of language we use. And I think at the end, I also like the comment about sort of Skinner talking about different viewpoints. So people look at behavior and understanding individuals from different perspectives, and he was obviously saying he didn't see very much use there from a cognitive perspective, but and I think that he said behavior analysis is something that is going to be the thing, the technology and the science that really helps improve lives. And for me, that's how I see the world a lot when I'm working with my caregivers and my animals. I think there's a lot of interesting different ways of looking at things, and I I will listen to podcasts or read books or read papers from different perspectives. However, when it comes to actually seeing a client and working with an animal, the information and technology that I find the most useful is a behavior analytic technology and a science. And so I find, and again, it's at one point he said it sounds either simple or it's not so simple. And it's so interesting as trainers, one of the things we learn is we're taught learning theory. And I always put that in quotes now because I don't really use the term just learning theory. It's taught like a little box, and you're taught that you learn a little bit about what's a positive reinforcer, negative reinforcer, positive punisher, negative punisher, and extinction, and all those things. But it's almost taught as little boxes, and I think we start going, oh yes, I understand learning theory. Actually, there's people who do PhDs on the topic, and then people who do postdoc research, and then there's people who split and just look at the antecedents, but look at one aspect of antecedents, and then one aspect of that, and look at it in such tiny sort of minuscule components, just like any other science or any other things that we look at. There's so much to learn, and sometimes you start reading more about certain things like reinforcers and positive reinforcements and schedules of reinforcement, and going into depth, and it starts becoming really confusing, and you go, oh my god, there's so much here. What I thought I actually understood, I don't really understand at all now. So I think for me, when I used to say like, oh yes, I understand learning theory, I'd never say that now. And just seeing how much there is to learn, it's like I love it and I want to learn more. And I think I have a different level of understanding of what we talk about or what I learn. But I just want us as trainers to not look at learning theory as this basic that we've been taught in a half an hour or 1 day seminar or workshop, because there's so much depth and so much information out there. And hopefully even just looking at some of the things we've seen over the last few weeks when watching these videos, how much interesting information there is and how much relevant information there is. So I think it's so useful to go in and want to study this in depth. And so if you are training, go, oh yeah, that learning theory stuff, I know it. I would probably say, let's start questioning that, start reading other things, go into depth in the behavior analytic textbook or some papers, and suddenly read one of Skinner's books, Science and Human Behavior, or one of those books, and suddenly you start going, whoa, there's so much information here, and you go down a rabbit hole. And I think it just makes us better trainers and behaviorists. And so for me, I have a huge bias, which is using sort of a behavior analytic approach, and radical behaviorism, which is the philosophy of experimental behavior analysis, but that is my bias, and I find that's the science that's most useful for me, helping people and animals. So let's see if we have any other comments. So we saw this comment earlier, so I'll just go to the next one. We did this one as well. I don't know if you guys are seeing it very glitchy, but I'm just having a lot of glitch issues on my side. When I click something, it appears and disappears, or it doesn't appear at all. Cheryl says, a quadrant killed my brains. And again, I think it's just, yeah. So when I teach like students about the quadrant, I don't even teach it as a quadrant. I teach the fact that there's a concept of the principles of reinforcement, which is the process by which behavior gets stronger. And so a behavior gets stronger, and it can happen in two ways. So it's a consequence. So as the behavior is occurring, there's a change in the environment, and a change in the environment results in more behavior. Now the behavior can be more in a few different ways. And so you could get more behavior because behavior happens quicker, or happens more often, so a higher rate of behavior, or you get shorter latency. So from the moment you say Rover here, Rover turns around and starts running to you quickly. There isn't like an 8-second lag. So you can see behavior getting stronger in lots of different ways. And I often say to my clients and trainers, when you think about reinforcement is like, think about reinforcing a building. You're strengthening it. When you talk about reinforcing behavior, we're trying to strengthen it. And then there's two ways that you can reinforce a build. You can reinforce by adding something or removing something. And so, and then we can go into different examples. So rather than and then if there's a behavior that the animal's engaging in, breaking it down again. So hold on a second, rather than trying to figure out, was it positive or negative reinforcement or punishment? First of all, did the behavior get stronger or weaker? If the behavior got stronger, we're talking about reinforcement at play. If the behavior got weaker, we're talking about some kind of punishment process at play. And then we're talking about, okay, so was something added or was something removed? And if something was added, we're talking about positive reinforcement. If something was removed, negative reinforcement. But when we do all of this, we also have to define the behavior up front. So if you've got a dog who jumps up, and actually, let's take the example. You got a dog who stops at the you get to a car and the dog stops the back of a car, and so say the trainer applies pressure on the collar, and the dog jumps in. Now you sometimes you get people going, well, actually, is that positive punishment or is that negative reinforcement, or is that both? Well, it's not both in that one moment in time. If you're looking at a specific behavior, both are occurring, because behavior is you're not just getting one response. Behavior is moving all the time, and so you're getting different responses. The animal's changing their responses. So they're getting to the car, and the boot opens, the dog stops, and when you apply the pressure on the collar, potentially what you could be doing is in the future, when the dog gets to the car and you don't see the stopping behavior, the behavior's got less. So the behavior of stopping at the back when the car door, the boot's open, the dog stopping is getting less punishment, and was something added or removed, something was added. So potentially we positively punish the behavior of stopping at the car. However, if we look at the behavior of jumping in the car, we go in the future, the dog gets to the car and they're jumping in more frequently, or they're jumping in quicker. So we could say that behavior's got stronger, so it must be reinforcement we're talking about. So the jumping into the car behavior is under the influence of reinforcement, and it's under the influence of negative reinforcement, because as the dog jumps in the car, there's a release of that pressure. And so the behavior of jumping in the car is negatively reinforced. The behavior of stopping at the back of the car is positively punished. So you have to define what behavior you're talking about before you try and work out whether. And also the other thing that I find that sometimes people get confused by in these discussions is the behavior that they're trying to identify as a negative. So they start with the dog doesn't want to jump in the car, or the dog stops doing something. And so that's a negative, that's the absence of behavior. So you can't analyze something that isn't happening. So what you want to do is you want to identify, first of all, when you identify the behavior, it has to be a statement of what's actually occurring. So the dog jumps in the car, or the dog stops, or the dog sits, or the dog stands, the dog lies down when they get to the back of the car. And so you have to first make sure you're identifying the positive response as opposed to what's not happening. And then you can analyze, is that behavior getting stronger? Now, you may not have that information because you may not know what's happening in the future. If you haven't had any future occurrences, or if you haven't got that information, the video cuts off, or the caregiver doesn't know. So you might have to go, I need to collect more data before I know what's going on. Or you might form a hypothesis, and then you can test the hypothesis by collecting data. Okay, let's see what other comments we have. Jenna says the fact that the owners, let's remove this video so I can see. Jenna says the fact that the owners have called a trainer or a behaviorist in to help. They are trying to help and support their dog no matter what type of trainer is called. But if it is one of us that they called, they are on the right track. Owners need guidance and support before the dog. Be kind. I don't think I need to say anything more. That's a very nice statement, Jenna. Francis says, the more you know you didn't know. Exactly. The more you learn what you don't know. Jenna says, only that one. And then Julie, hi Julie. Julie says, don't underestimate your clients. Just in response to general comment of clients, not a specific comment. They may be professionals and scientists in other field. Exactly. Such a great point, Julie. Just an enthusiastic owner and a rocket scientist in my profession. I get frustrated by dog owners simplifying dog trainers simplifying things, such as make no sense, take me longer to figure out than going to the source of material. So exactly, and I think for me, it's not about one. It's not about we always have to say things in one way. The point here is we need to adjust our criteria based on the learner we have in front of us. There's no point saying things that don't make sense to someone where they already have a set of vocabulary that that's established with certain behaviors and certain understanding that could be useful in that moment. So I think what we need to do always is be adjusting our response to the individual in front of us, as opposed to the animal in our heads or in our minds, the learner in our minds, and be focusing on treating each client as an individual. So we go to the next client. We don't just go, well, I always say this to every client, but actually going, who is the client in front of me, and taking a moment to understand their learning history, because then we can change the phrasing and the things that we're using. And also, if we listen to what they're saying, we phrase things in a different way. So I think that's a very good point, Julie. Jessica says, there are decades of misinformation to sort through. Most people are trying to do their best with what information they have access to. Providing accurate information to our clients and to the veterinary world will change that. It's generally not included in vet training. It takes time. I work with a vet who is amazed that you can ask a dog to get on the table rather than forcing them. It's a process. Breakthroughs happen every day. We are all perpetual students. Exactly. And I love the fact that you say we're all students, because we are. We're always learning. And I think that's the thing, is we all learn. Our learning histories are different. We're not robots. We're not all going to be the same. There's differences there. And I think those differences are because of our genetics, our biology, and our learning history. And that makes, that's why you get these different perspectives and different opinions. And I think the people who've had other learning histories that you haven't had access to could give you information about things that you have no idea about. And so as a culture, as a large group of people, if everyone just had the same information, you wouldn't get lots of diversity and lots of learning about new things. And so the fact that everyone has information in different areas and different strengths is beneficial from a survival perspective. Lucas says, sad thing, most education for dog trainers, learning theory wise, stops at consequences, the quadrants. There's usually been a backlash in the training community saying ABA is too narrow and reduces a dog to quadrants when there's so much more to ABA. Exactly, Lucas, I agree. And I think consequences are a large part of it. And I think, but there's a lot to go through from an antecedent perspective, antecedents, how they control behavior. And essentially, there's a lot to do with how consequences affect antecedents and give them the power to have control over certain behaviors as well. It is in large a science of consequences, but I think there are so many different elements and perspectives outside of just looking at, like you say, the quadrant. And so I think by understanding and taking time to look at all of those, I think for me, ABA is like different people practice things in different ways. So you could say, well, I like to do this, but actually this practitioner in the same field, they work very differently, or there's a different understanding of the same information. And I think you get that in ABA as well. So you get different practitioners, different people apply it different ways, different understanding of ABA. And for me, I think what I've read and the understanding I have, and I just see so much use for it, and I don't see it being narrow. And I think that's the point of some of these videos that we've used over the last couple of weeks, to actually look at how broad of a scope there is here, as opposed to it just being about some kind of black box or just what's happening on one side. And so I think that's exactly the point of the videos over the last few weeks, is to illustrate how much more there is to behavior analysis and the science. So thank you very much for joining me today, guys. Hope you have had a wonderful Sunday, and we can plan on meeting again next week. We'll have another a Skinner video we can go through, and so I will select another video, and next week on Sunday, 8:30 Greenwich Mean Time again, same place, same time, we will go for another video. And I'll try and select slightly different videos each week. So the first week we had more of a talking video, and then last week's video was more it showed some practical stuff in there, and so I'll try and find our next video and see what we can do with it. Have a wonderful week. If you're in the UK, remember to check out Cats and Dogs at War tomorrow night, 8 p.m. The time's changed on channel 5 Star. Yeah, hopefully you guys enjoy it.